Morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. All right, thank you. Good morning and welcome. Glad everyone is here for the 2023 Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Convocation. Can you please give us some love? My name is John Holloway. I am your Vice President for Student Affairs and Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. I want to thank you for not taking a day off and for being here as we continue to tell the story of the life and legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Students, I want to say a very special thank you for you all being here. It's early, it's cold outside, and I wanted to acknowledge that. I want to acknowledge also our faculty and staff. Can I ask our faculty and staff to please stand so we can recognize and show you some appreciation as well? Thank you for being here. So at this time, I'm pleased to welcome and introduce the Emory and Henry Concert Choir and Chamber Singers. We will start the program with two spirituals. Thank you.
To for today because it's one of Dr. King's favorite hymns, so I wanted to share that with you. And I also wanted to thank the members of both choirs for being excited to be here, and our wonderful accompanist and collaborative pianist, Brian Underwood, for being with us today. Our second piece is a traditional spiritual that was just arranged by Mr. Stacy Gibbs from Detroit, Michigan last year. So spirituals are an art form that are still very much alive in the choral world and offer us a great way to a nice window into conversations about anti-racism, about the history of Black music, the history of Black America, and different things in the choral classroom that we're excited to share here today. So please enjoy our last piece, Wait Till I Put On My Crown, by Stacy Gibbs.
Oh boy, can we give them some more love, please? As my grandmother would say, my. The theme for this year's MLK Convocation is Be the Face of Change. Be the face of change. So what does that mean to you? be the face of change. We want all of your faces to reflect that action, that power to bring about change. On behalf of the MLK Planning Committee, we are asking you to take up action. As you listen to the keynote speakers, both in the morning and this evening, and attend the breakout sessions, we would ask you to reflect and to think about what we do individually and collectively as a community to make a positive change in our own little corner of the world. This is certainly a day to honor the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and be in observance of his contributions and in the spirit that we want to invoke, action. I want to ask a few very serious questions for you. What can you do differently? How might you listen, active listening, attentively? How do you engage? And finally, how do you contribute? We have many great speakers and events planned for you today. Please take time to reflect, to ponder, and most importantly, to respond. We are meant to lead. Emory Henry, we are meant to lead. We are all called to action. We are meant to inspire, and it starts with you. I would like to give a special acknowledgement to the MLK Convocation Planning Committee. If any of the Planning Committee members are here right now, can you please stand? Great work. Thank you very much. And they have been under the leadership of Dr. Jill Went. Dr. Went is our new Director of Inclusion, Community Development, and Belonging. Dr. Went, would you please stand? We are so very fortunate to have Dr. Went here, and she has indeed put her signature on this convocation as well as DEI&B in a very short period of time. So thank you for being here again. I want to also take a moment just to acknowledge the Student Affairs Division. If we have any other folks who are here from Student Affairs, can you please stand at this time? Okay. Well, thank you. A few housekeeping items, or just one primarily, and that is, how many students are here hoping to get credit for a Lyceum? Raise your hand, please. Look around the room. You know, I'll just remind you, what do you need to do? Register with the QR code, both entering and exiting the program. And so that's for every Lyceum that we have. You must sign in through the QR code in order to receive Lyceum credit. That's for our keynotes and the breakout sessions today. At this time, it is my pleasure and honor to bring to the stage someone who I believe embodies many of the principles of Dr. King, someone who devotes uncompromised leadership to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Please give a nice welcome to the president of Emory & Henry, Dr. John Wells.
Thank you, John, and welcome to everyone at this great celebration of the life and the legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. I want to also thank our choir as they're making their way back into the auditorium. What a beautiful couple of selections that really set such a wonderful tone for us today. You know, I've always had a little bit of hesitancy just focusing in on the life of Dr. King, because today is about more than just one person, as remarkable a person as he was. It is the ideas that are so important with which we must continue to contend. When Dr. King was so cruelly cut down in April of 1968, when that single rifle shot rang out in Memphis, Tennessee, something did go out of the soul of America that day, and yet each and every one of us in this room can take up the mantle and can continue that good work. It's important to reflect on the words that Dr. King gave us, that we can all be great because we can all serve. It's one of my favorite quotations of Dr. King. And I think it's very important on a day that has his name on it for us to be reminded that we can, in fact, serve. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche argued in The Uses and Abuses of History for Life. He reflected that sometimes we can look back on heroes and we can think of them as being so much larger than life, and we, by contrast, feel so inadequate, and we can't really live up to the legacy of our heroes, and oftentimes that leads us to the unfortunate conclusion that we have nothing to contribute. But nothing could be further from the truth. Several things about Dr. King I think are important for us to reflect on today. One, he was a controversial figure in his day, and not just from those who would hurl hateful, racist epithets at him as he would lead marches in the streets all over this country. He was controversial even among those who shared the vision of a society that was, in fact, more inclusive and more just. He had frequent conversations where he disagreed with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee leadership, where he would disagree with others in the NAACP. He would argue that it's really the legal path is the primary way that society is going to be changed. He was, in fact, a controversial figure. It's important for us to realize that even as we look back on his life and legacy today, that he had to have the moral courage to engage not just those who were enemies of a just society, but he also had to have the moral courage to engage his friends. A final point that I like to reflect on when I think about Dr. King is that he was a constantly evolving person. We see his life as, again, cut so tragically short. Seems as though it's tied up in a neat bow of 39 years of amazing speeches and great leadership. And yet the reality is he was continuing to evolve as a human being. He recognized that justice and engaging in conversations about justice can take many forms. It was a very difficult thing for him to do by the middle part of the 1960s, to break with a president who had signed the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and had supported fair housing legislation. He broke with President Johnson on the issue of the Vietnam War, even as the president was talking about honor in Southeast Asia. Dr. King reminded us that there is precious little honor in bombing women and children across the face of Southeast Asia. That was moral courage. recognizing that there are always new frontiers of justice. In fact, in that April 1968 moment when he had traveled to Memphis, it was not a specifically civil rights issue that he was addressing. He was actually there as an advocate for sanitation workers whose wages were kept artificially low and their hours long, and there was dangerous work involved in being a sanitation worker in Memphis. He recognized that there were many issues of justice that need to be engaged. He understood that moral courage was necessary to face a whole panoply of issues that deny us the just society that so many of us crave. And so we reflect today on the life of Dr. King, someone who, to be sure, was great, but also someone who was a human being with all of the contradictions and complexities of humanity. But there's something that we can draw from that I think is inspiring. We too can, in fact, be great because we can serve and we can follow his noble example. We have here with us today, it's my great honor to introduce a friend of this college and a friend to me, and that is Brooklyn Sawyers Belk. Brooklyn is one of our own. She is a 2002 graduate of Emory and Henry College. She was a history major and a political science minor. She was a proud Bonner and AmeriCorps scholar, and later Brooklyn served on the college's alumni board and had distinguished service as a member of the Board of Trustees for Emory and Henry. Currently, she is teaching race in the United States Supreme Court for us this semester. Brooklyn earned a master's degree from East Tennessee State University and a Juris Doctorate from the University of Tennessee. She's had careers as a federal prosecutor for the United States Department of Justice, a law firm partner for an Atlanta-based firm, where she was the first Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusions Officer and the first African-American partner and in-house counsel for a Silicon Valley technological company. Currently, Brooklyn is a visiting professor of law for the University of Tennessee and consults with various organizations to achieve their diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. Brooklyn has several family members here today, including her husband, Lamont, who is also an attorney, and two of their three children, Joseph and Joshua, and an aunt and cousin from Whitfield, Virginia. If you're a member of Brooklyn's family, could you please stand and be welcomed here today? Again, it is my great honor and a privilege to introduce for our keynote for the Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Reflection, Brooklyn Sawyers Belk.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me today. I understand that there are a number of students who are waiting to be admitted. It will not disturb me. You may let them come in as they arrive. I'm Brooklyn Sawyers Belk, and it's my pleasure to speak with you today. The last time I was here, it was speaking at the first multicultural graduation in 2016. and it's a pleasure to be back today. Let us begin with a moment of prayer. Dear Heavenly and gracious Father, thank you for the gift that we call Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., and the gift of service through his life and dedication to making society a better place. Allow today to be consistent with your word in Ephesians 4:29, that everything we say be good and helpful, so that our words will be an encouragement to those who hear them, and that, like Dr. King, we can be a light in darkness. In Jesus' name, amen. I'd like to begin today with a test. Raise your hand if you're familiar with the privilege test or the privilege walk. Okay, several of you. The questions on the screen are a modified version of the privilege walk. We're going to call it a test, and I'm going to call on a few people by name to participate, but I ask that everyone in the audience join along and keep up with your score. If the statement applies to you, you will give yourself plus 5 points. If the statement does not apply to you, you will subtract 5 points. I'm going to call on Professor Lamont Belk, my husband, Dr. Jill Went, Dr. John Holloway, Dr. Sarah Fisher, Dr. Wells, if you'll participate, please, and Damisha Wiggins, one of the students in my class. The questions are as follows. I was raised by two parents in the same home. I was raised by two parents in the same home. If that is true for you, give yourself 5 points. I feel comfortable when expressing my faith in public. For example, a moment ago, I prayed aloud. If you're comfortable expressing your faith, as I did, in public, add 5 points. Number 3, I recall that as a child, I had a parent or guardian who read to me. As a child, a parent or guardian read to me. 4, I have traveled outside the United States. 5, I have never been asked whether my biological child, in fact, belongs to me. I have never been questioned whether my biological child, in fact, belongs to me. Number 6, I have never left an institution, whether a college class or a job, because I felt ostracized because of my race or gender, or the race or gender of my partner or children. In other words, I've never shied away from an institution because of my race or gender or that of my partner or child. Number 7, I have never been told to ignore catcalls, sexual advances, or provocative gestures to protect my professional reputation. In other words, I've never been told, ignore that, let it go. If you say something, it's going to harm your professional reputation. And last, I have a master's degree or beyond. Take a moment to tally your scores, and I'll call on a couple of you perhaps to share your score for a point of illustration. Yes? 5. Thank you for your candor. Professor Belk? 5. Dr. Wells? 40. Monica Hoyle, are you with us?
I am.
My dear friend, Monica and I go back so far that I'm not going to tell you how far. Monica, what's your score?
Oh, Lord, you didn't tell me there was math involved. Some of those didn't apply to me
Okay.
because of children and that sort of thing, but I would have to say probably 25.
Thank you, Monica. Damisha? 10. If I were to call those people on stage, and if this were the starting line, some would be further ahead than others to start their life or their career. Some of those things are based off mere social constructs, things that as a society we say are important to us. Based on many of those questions, the individuals who answered had no control over it one way or another. You don't get to choose your parents, whether they actually wanted you, took care of you, read to you as a child, made sure that you went to school and got an education, supported you. Other things you do control. Social constructs are basically things that as a society we say are normal. They're part of our customs. Some argue that skin color or race are social constructs. Let's talk about that for a moment, and I'm going to call on Dr. Fisher to help me a moment. Do we have mics available? And if not, I bet she's going to be loud enough to...
I can use my teacher voice.
Yeah, she's a professor here, so she can be loud enough, but it looks like we have a mic for you. Thank you.
Is this working?
Yes, Dr. Fisher, will you read, please?
Yes. White, having the color of new snow or milk, light or pale in color, marked by upright fairness, free from spot or blemish, free from moral impurity, innocent, marked by the wearing of white by the woman as a symbol of purity, unmarked by writing or printing, not intended to cause harm. For example, she told a little white lie. Favorable, fortunate, of or relating to any of the various population groups considered as having light pigmentation of the skin. Note, the meaning of white as it relates to population groups has historically been fluid, with people of particular ancestries being excluded for a time before being included, and vice versa. The category has also often functioned as a grouping into which people who are not designated as belonging in some other category are placed. Specific parameters are, however, sometimes set, as in the United States 2020 census, which stipulates that, quote, the category of white includes all individuals who identify with one or more nationalities or ethnic groups originating in Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa.
Thank you, Dr. Fisher. So just to recap, did you say purity, Dr. Fisher?
Yes?
Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
Moral impurity.
Moral purity, and we got that definition from Merriam-Webster's dictionary to describe white. We'll pass the mic now to Vice President Holloway. Tell us the definition of black as found in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, please.
I'm getting the light right here so I can see it. So, of the very darkest color owing to the absence of or complete absorption of light. The opposite of white. Characterized by the absence of light, thoroughly sinister or evil, wicked, indicative of condemnation or discredit. For example, I got a black mark for being late. Heavy, serious, connected with or invoking the supernatural, and especially the devil. Very sad, gloomy, marked by the occurrence of disaster, characterized by hostility or angry discontent, sullen, distorted or darkened by anger, rage, having dark skin, hair, and eyes.
Thank you so much, Vice President Holloway. Immutable characteristics, skin color, race, assigned a specific value by mankind as defined in the definitions that were just read to you. If you had to choose one of those definitions to describe you, which might you choose? That's a rhetorical question. You don't have to answer, but I think it's fairly obvious that one is more positive than the other. We've assigned these social constructs, and these words have meaning. They impact society. Society is determined that we are going to say that one thing is better than the other, and that's often referred to as privilege. Let's talk about privilege for a moment. I'm going to give you an example of two people. One we will call Sarah to protect her identity. She's someone I've known for a very long time. She was born to two parents in Chicago who were well educated and loved her. She was their only child. She received a bachelor's degree and then a Juris Doctorate. She began to practice law, and then she married an attorney. That attorney was the son of an attorney, and he inherited his father's law practice and was very successful and made more money than Sarah could spend. He indulged her and spoiled her, and she had all the material things one could ask for. Even as that relationship ended and they divorced, she married another lawyer who loved her all the same and spoiled her likewise. And as I got to know Sarah over her lifetime, Sarah said to me that she lived a very charmed life. Some things she did, like getting an education, which she earned, but some of it she was just born into. On the other hand, there's Susan, a young woman I mentored for a period of time. Susan is multiracial, father African American, and her mother was Caucasian. As a young child, she was born into domestic violence. One day, as a young child, her father attacked her mother and murdered her in the presence of Susan and her brother. Eventually, they were rescued from the home. The mother deceased. The father went to the penitentiary where he remains for killing her mother. She was given to her maternal grandmother to raise. Her maternal grandmother could not separate her hate for the monster who killed her daughter and the child's skin color, which was brown. She hated her, and her racism shone through as she raised Susan. That was the life she had. Susan did not do anything to deserve that. That's just the life she was born into. On one hand, Sarah's had a very charmed life, the attorney in this story. And on the other hand, Susan, not so much, right? They started at different places in life. When we talk about privilege, I give you those examples to say that there's many types of privilege. Education privilege and marriage privilege, socioeconomic privilege. But as a society, we tend to focus on what kind of privilege? What is it? White privilege. That's the word that we often hear. And in some contexts, it's become a dirty word, right? When in reality, what we want to focus on, perhaps, is that we're merely acknowledging that as a society, some things are given privilege over other things, and as a result, maybe, just maybe, somebody starts up here with 40 points and someone back here with -5. It's an acknowledgement that, for example, in my life, because of the fact that I am a lawyer, I get to go into certain spaces and do certain things that I just wouldn't be invited to do if I didn't have the privilege of being part of that group. It doesn't have to be a bad thing, but it is one that perhaps we should acknowledge to understand our fellow man and their starting point. When we talk about privilege, our words matter. I had Dr. Fisher and Vice President Holloway read to you those definitions because I want to emphasize words throughout our discussion today. And because I'm an attorney and I teach law, I'm going to use the Supreme Court's words to make some points about privilege and to talk about these categories of race. We're going to start here with 3 landmark Supreme Court decisions. We're going to start with Dred Scott versus Sanford. It's a decision from 1857. You might be thinking, my goodness, she's going back a long ways. Well, bear with me. We'll work our way to the present. In Dred Scott versus Sanford, Scott had been a slave. But he left the slave state where he lived, and he went into free territory. After living as a free man, he returned to the slave state where he petitioned the court to say, I have lived as a free man, therefore I am now free. I want you, court, to co-sign that and agree with me. The opposition in the case said, not so much. Not only are you not free, you're not even a citizen of the United States of America to come before this court and ask for the relief that you seek. I'm going to put the case in my own words for a moment, and then we'll talk about the Supreme Court's actual words. My reaction to the case is this, that the Supreme Court basically told Mr. Scott, boy, how dare you waste this court's time and even beckon the courthouse steps. Of course you're not free. You're not one of us. You're not even a citizen. We will not waste these good folks' time who own you. You are a slave. Stay in a slave's place. My words, not theirs. But let's go to their words. The issue in the case I've highlighted for you, and the rule or the holding from the case, is that people of African descent are not citizens. They were not meant to be included in the United States Constitution, and if you're not included there, you don't have standing or the right to come before the court and ask for anything at all, let alone freedom. Let's examine the words specifically. Some of them are on the screen. In the opinion of the court, the legislation and histories of the times and the language used in the Declaration of Independence show that neither the class of persons who had been imported as slaves nor their descendants, whether they become free or not. In other words, the status of slavery was not the imperative fact, it was where you come from, the color of your skin. Were then not acknowledged to be part of the people, nor intended to be included in the general words used in that memorable instrument, the United States Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. The court went on to say that it is difficult at this day to realize the state of opinion in relation to that unfortunate race, those of African descent, which prevailed on the civilized and enlightened portions of the world. In other words, European or Caucasian people or white people. At the time the Declaration of Independence and the United States Constitution were framed and adopted, but the public history of every European nation displays it in a manner that's too plain to be mistaken. In other words, it doesn't take a degree to figure this part out. And I quote, they, referring to people of African descent, had more than a century before been regarded as beings of an inferior order and altogether unfit to even associate with the white race, either in social or political relations, and so far inferior that they had no rights at all that the white man was bound to respect, and that the Negro might justly and lawfully be reduced to slavery for whose benefit? For his own benefit. He was bought and sold and treated as ordinary articles of merchandise and trafficked wherever a profit could be made. This opinion was so fixed and universal, in other words, everybody believed it. In the civilized portion of the white race, it was regarded as an axiom in morals as well as in politics, which no one thought of disputing or supposed to be open to dispute. Accordingly, a Negro of the African race was regarded as an article of property and held and bought and sold as such. In every one of the 13 colonies which united in the Declaration of Independence and afterwards formed the United States Constitution. Do you find those words to be powerful? Since y'all sat on the front row, I'm just going to keep coming back to y'all because, you know, that's glutton for punishment. What do y'all think of those words?
I guess it really just shows that at the time, people who were considered descendants of Africa or Africans seen as property and not even used.
Right.
For people.
Property. Where's your personal property today? Mine's sitting on the floor back there in the green room. Looks like some of your bags are on the floor here. Ordinary articles of merchandise. This is language from the United States Supreme Court, the highest court in the nation, to which we look to interpret our laws and give meaning to words. Words matter. This case is forever written in our history books. Can't be undone. That's what the court said. Well, you might be looking at me and saying, why in the world is this woman stuck in 1856? Can we please move forward? Sure, absolutely. Let's do so. After 1856, we had the Civil War, correct? Where's my history majors? Dr. Little here? What years? Anybody? Yes, thank you. 1861 to 1865. 1861 to 1865, we have the Civil War. 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation signed by President Lincoln, freed the slaves that were in the states in rebellion. 1865, the war ends. Slavery's over. 13th Amendment, no more slavery, abolished. 14th Amendment, citizenship rights to former slaves. 15th Amendment, voting rights. It's all fixed, right? But then we had the period of Reconstruction. People of African descent were judges and in elected positions. It was all fixed, right? Well, no, it wasn't. 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson. Plessy was 7/8 Caucasian. To look at him, his skin color matched the definition Dr. Fisher read to us earlier. He did not look like me. His skin was white. He was 1/8 African descent. I'm not even sure exactly what that means or how we knew that, but that's what the case says. He decided to be a test subject, a test subject. In other words, he answered the call of service. He agreed with a community group to sit in the whites-only section of a train. Although he appeared white, and the train company agreed to participate. Even though he looked white, he could not sit there because he had a drop of black blood. He was asked to move. He refused. He was arrested. The case goes to the Supreme Court, skipping ahead. The issue before the Supreme Court effectively is separate but equal facilities consistent with the 14th Amendment, the rights to citizenship and equal protection under the U.S. Constitution. Remember, in the Dred Scott case, the Supreme Court made it clear, the Constitution and Declaration of Independence was not meant to include those people. But then we had the Civil War, and we got the Civil War amendments, and the 14th Amendment made it clear that that wasn't the case, right? Now everybody's equal citizens. There's equal protection under the law. But throughout the South, and beyond, but we'll focus on that for purposes of argument's sake, there was this notion that, sure, we could have equality under the law, but still have separation in public facilities, which born separate but equal. So now this case is before the Supreme Court in Plessy versus Ferguson. Are these separate facilities consistent with the mandate under the 14th Amendment for equal protection? And what did the Supreme Court do when they had the opportunity to lead by example with their words? Who knows Plessy? Did I see your hand go up? I see a half hand. He's like, I'm not sure.
I don't know.
The court, fairly consistent with the Dred Scott decision that predated the Civil War amendments, said separate but equal is perfectly fine. It doesn't violate equal protection. It's fine for, in a public facility, to say we're going to separate all the people of African descent and they're going to be in the balcony. And the people who are not of African descent, they can sit down front here, or drink out of the water fountain, or use the bathroom, or eat in the restaurant. The court's specific language is found on the screen. I'll read you a portion of it. A statute which implies merely a legal distinction between the white and colored races, a distinction which is founded in the color of the two races, which must always exist. I'm going to pause there for a moment. The court said that despite legislation changing the Constitution, despite that, the distinction between white and black will always exist. This is the example our great court gave us. So long as white men are distinguished from the other race by color, and such distinction has no tendency to destroy the legal equality of the two races or reestablish a state of involuntary servitude or slavery. The court went on to say that Mr. Plessy's argument assumed that social prejudice could be overcome by legislation, and that equal rights cannot be secured to the Negro except by an enforced commingling of the races. In other words, integration, right? That's what Plessy was arguing. And how did the court respond to that? That if the two races are to meet upon terms of social equality, it must be the result of natural affinities. In other words, it's a choice. Vice President Holloway gave a call for service to step up and be the face of change. That's what I understand those words to mean. It must be the result of natural affinities, a mutual appreciation of each other's merits, and a voluntary consent of individuals. The court, who again interprets the laws for the nation, said, legislation is powerless to eradicate racial instincts or to abolish distinctions based upon physical differences. You remember what Dr. Fisher and Vice President Holloway read to you? The court says the law is powerless to change that. And any attempt to do so can only result in accentuating the difficulties of the present situation. In other words, if you folks try to change things, it's just going to get worse. If the civil and political rights of both races be equal, i.e., if the Constitution says so, you get to do more stuff now than you did pre-1865. One cannot be inferior to the other civilly or politically. If one race be inferior to the other socially, the Constitution of the United States of America cannot put them on the same plane. With the stroke of a pen, the Supreme Court co-signed, agreed with, validated this notion of separate but equal. What followed the aftermath of Plessy? Hint, the answer's on the board. What was that span of time referred to between Plessy, or the end of Reconstruction, moving up to the civil rights movement? Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
I think it's Jim Crow era.
Yes, ma'am. Thanks so much for answering. The Jim Crow era. The Jim Crow era. Which spanned at least until 1954 with the Brown decision, right? Well, some of you might be thinking, because many of you were born in the 2000s, I would imagine. As students, you might be thinking, well, that was still an awful long time ago, Professor Sawyers Belk. Yeah, that's true. But let me tell you why it's relevant. In addition to these words lasting all time and influencing the nation, coming from our highest court down, when you think about it, it's really not that long ago. My grandfather was born in 1908. 1908. He was born into Jim Crow South, where he lived his whole life. He died in the South. He lived during this era, and he lived well into my adulthood. He lived until 98 years old. He died in 2007. And I remember a moment when I went into his assisted living facility to visit. He had so many children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren by then, and he did not know any of us by name. All the males were boy and all the females were gal. So I was Gal, and I walked in to visit, and he said, Gal? I said, yes, Paw. He said, are you the one that they tell me's a lawyer? I said, yes, Paw, that's me. And he was sitting in a recliner chair rocking as he had done throughout his life with his leg crossed, and he turned and he looked out the picture window, and he said, imagine that, a colored girl, a lawyer. I don't know what he meant by that. I don't know what he was thinking. But based on the pain in his eyes and the expression on his face, I imagine that he was looking back through all those Jim Crow years, coming up as a young boy in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and raising children in that environment. And him remarking with marvel at the fact that a person of African descent could be an attorney. My grandfather lived so long that he had an impression on my life. Like I said, I was already out of law school practicing law. I was an adult. And I think we're naive if we believe that what happened in our grandparents' lives, or maybe you all are so young, maybe it was your great-grandparents, your great-grandparents, your grandparents, your parents' lives does not have an impact, is not passed down to us generationally, just like the words of the Supreme Court set the tone for so many things. I want to talk to you a little bit about Jim Crow. I include this in my presentation because we're yet to receive justice for this young 14-year-old boy. Who is this? Thank you. Emmett Till. Emmett Till lived in Chicago, Illinois with his mother, Mamie, and he went on vacation to the south, to Money, Mississippi. And what happened? Never came home. The picture of him is who she sent on vacation on the left, and on the right is a picture of his body as it lay in the casket at his funeral. He was her only child, and she's now deceased, but I studied a lot of what she said about what happened, and as the mother of two little black boys myself, it always really resonates with me. And she said that she decided to have an open casket at the funeral and allow Jet Magazine to take that picture and publish it because the world had to see what Jim Crowism really was. Allegedly, Emmett Till whistled at a white woman, Carolyn Bryan, in a store while he was there with some cousins. Some accounts now say that that was a lie, that he did not look at her for a prolonged period of time nor whistle at her. Nevertheless, that was the belief, and when he went home, two of her family members came and kidnapped him, took him. He was beat, he was shot, his eye was gouged out, and a cotton gin fan was tied around his neck to ensure that his body was weighed down in the Tallahatchie River to avoid it coming to the surface and being discovered more quickly. That was Jim Crowism. I could go on, and Damisha and others who are taking my class currently will get to hear the longer version of all these cases. There's 30 or so that we cover in that class, and there's several hundred that we could talk about. A few are on the screen. For the sake of today's time, we're not going to go through all of those, but we could cover the Supreme Court's words in a variety of cases. We could talk about segregation in housing and violation of the 15th Amendment voting rights. We could talk about segregation and integration in schools more. But I'll give you this for you to look at later yourself, and we'll jump ahead to Brown versus Board of Education, which was decided in 1954. May 17th of 1954, Chief Justice Earl Warren led a unanimous Supreme Court to issue this decision, which desegregated schools. In part because of it, this room is integrated now, and you see black children and white children, let me rephrase, white young adults and black young adults who are attending school here. I received an integrated education in part because of Brown. So you might wonder, did Brown fix it all? Is that the end of the presentation? No, it's not, because as I said, it was decided May 17th of 1954, but there was a line in that decision that said schools should be integrated with all deliberate speed. All deliberate speed, meaning slowly and carefully, with a lot of thought. There was some concern that the country would break out in another great civil war like we saw in 1861. And no one wanted that. So let's take our time. Let's be careful. Despite that all deliberate speed, there was still violence. It took, in some places, more than a decade to realize full integration. I know that personally because my mother was born after Brown. She was not alive in 1954. Yet she went to segregated schools. As a result of that delay and her going to segregated schools, she must have had some experiences that left a lifetime impact on her because she went to her grave with race issues. Whatever trauma she faced going from segregated to integrated schools and the pain associated with that blessing, that change, had a really difficult impact on her, and one that she passed on to us as her children. Did your parents have an experience that maybe they talked about in your home that left an impression on you? That's a rhetorical question. You don't have to answer, but think about it. In Brown, the court said that separate but equal is inherently unequal. It is in violation of the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. I highlight that to say that sometimes even our great court gets it wrong. In order for Brown to overrule Plessy, it means Plessy screwed up. Our Constitution is supposed to govern the nation. The laws are supposed to mean something. We're supposed to count on them. But despite the 14th Amendment amending the U.S. Constitution to say there's equality in citizenship, the Supreme Court went out of their way to read it to say something different. That resulted in all those years of Jim Crow, and the Brown court comes back along and says, you know what, y'all? We got it wrong. What does that mean for each of us? That sometimes, even when people in positions of authority tell us something, and they say it's okay to mistreat this group of people or prize this group of people over others, that just maybe it's wrong. Well, Brooklyn, we're still in the mid-1900s, and for those of us born in the 2000s, that's just too long ago, and we still think this is old stuff and it's not a reality for us. Well, in your lifetime, recently, last year and the year before, America saw the greatest civil rights movement since the 1960s. It started with what? Well, let me rephrase. That was a loaded question. You could give me a bunch of different answers to that. What happened in Minneapolis, Minnesota? Anybody? Answers on the screen. I make this easy. Class will be harder today, Misha, I promise. What happened? Derek Chauvin went to arrest George Floyd, and during the arrest, what happened? Say it again. She said George Floyd was murdered. Derek Chauvin's knee stayed on George Floyd's neck for how many minutes? 9 minutes. How much time do I have, Dr. Went? For the sake of this last 10 minutes, we will not stand here for 9 minutes for the effect of seeing how long 9 minutes really is. Derek Chauvin was charged. What was the result of that trial? He was convicted. The other officers who were there that day were convicted. And then what happened in South Georgia and the Southern District of Georgia for federal category purposes, where my husband used to be a federal prosecutor for the Honorable Ed Tarver. And in that district, what happened to Ahmaud Arbery? He was shot by whom? 3 men. The McMichaels, father and son, and one of their friends were involved, and that case was tried first in the state in 2021 and again in the feds in 2022. And a dear girlfriend of mine was one of the prosecutors involved, and I was fortunate to have her come talk to my class last semester. I hope that she'll be able to do so this semester. And she talked about the case, and the reason I'm bringing these up, these are not Supreme Court decisions yet. We'll see if they seek cert to the Supreme Court, and if the Supreme Court grants it, we'll see how that all turns out in a year or two. But the reason that I point these out is because they happened recently. And what were some of the things that we were talking about as those cases unfolded? Race. It was still divisive. 1857 or 1896 or 1954 or 2021. In the McMichaels case, all the black jurors were struck from the veneer. The court said, the judge that was sitting on the case said, I believe there was intentional discrimination in this panel, but based on the law, there's nothing I can do about it. We're going to let the all-white jury sit, and we're going to move on from the black jurors being struck. Why are we still talking about the same exact issues? Why was there a concern of having an all-white jury if our system of justice says that based on the law, a person gets a fair trial? Why would it matter who makes up the jury box? Why was there this perception that, we should strike all the black jurors? Is there a perception that depending on who's in the jury box today determines the outcome and what justice looks like in America? Surely our Constitution isn't boiled down to something so trite. But why are we still talking about it? One of the cases we could have discussed today is Batson v. Kentucky, 1986. Mr. Batson was on trial for a felony offense of burglary. All the black jurors were struck from that jury. A challenge was made, and there the court said, you can't go striking all the black people or any group, specific group under Title VII. You can't do that. You have to be able to articulate a non-discriminatory reason for striking these folks, and in that case, the prosecutor couldn't. There was a judge on the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, the court that sits beneath the Supreme Court, one of the Court of Appeals in the nation, Bernice Donnell, a dear mentor and friend of mine, and she used to say that post-Batson, it's a very piss-poor prosecutor that can't come up with a non-discriminatory reason for striking all the people they want off. Is that what it boils down to? I want to turn to solutions, and we're going to talk about this more in the breakout session where we can have more of a discussion and conversation. But it boils down to this. Whatever happened all those years ago that our great-grandparents and grandparents and parents faced, we're now talking about us, you. Will you be the face of change? What legacy will you leave to your children and your children's children? Will you be part of the solution, or will you accept that, well, that's what white is? Dr. Fisher told us. That's what black is. Vice President Holloway read the definition. That's the legacy the Supreme Court's given us, passing down these race issues, this divisiveness. We're going to accept it. Or will you be the face of change? Let's talk about some best practices. There's a book called Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria by Dr. Tatum. It's a dated book now, but I still use it because when I go into institutions of higher education and other institutions, I see segregation. The last time I was in Van Dyke, you could see groups of people who look like each other sitting together. Have anyone else made that observation? Thank you. What's one small thing you can do right away to start changing the way campus looks, to be part of the solution and to move away from this divisiveness? Thank you.
To always say hi to people, to always include everyone in conversation, to always be friendly to people right when you meet them.
Thank you. It's a good example. Another is perhaps the best person to tell you about their experience is who? The person who had the experience. Maybe I can just accept that your experience being a student from, I don't know, poverty-stricken place in Appalachia has caused you to feel isolated on campus when you're around people who don't have that background. The fact that maybe I don't share it, it's okay. I can take you at your word that that's your experience, and I can work with you to overcome that, to make you feel less isolated and more welcome. I can work on integrating the environment by choosing to sit somewhere else and get to know the person. I can challenge my own biases. When you walk in the room and you see someone and you automatically think, oh, that person must be whatever, fill in the blank. You can ask yourself, why am I reaching that conclusion? I don't know the person yet. Maybe I should give them a chance or an opportunity. Use your privilege to make room at the table. You all are going to be very successful professionals soon, and you'll be out in the workplace. And you'll see some things that are unfair and unjust. And it's your job to stand up and say something about it. When something that is said is just wrong, I use the example all the time that as men, if you're in a place and you hear a disparaging remark about women, let's say the B word, but there's no women in the room, should you still say something? Yes, because it's wrong. It doesn't matter who's in the room. What about the N word? I use this as an extreme example. We typically don't see that as much anymore. We typically see microaggressions, which are a little more difficult to identify perhaps, but let's use an extreme example just to make the point. You hear the N word directed at people of color, but there's no person of color in the room. Should you say something? Absolutely, because it's wrong regardless to who's in the room. And sometimes it's the person that it doesn't apply to who has the greatest power to be able to say something. In other words, if you see something, say something. Be that voice. Be that face of change. And you say that in this class at Emory and Henry College, we don't say that. Some of the folks who are in my class currently would know that the first night of class when we started, I said we're going to read cases that have a lot of ugly words in them and books also. And in this class, we don't say them. When you get to the word, you say, you spell it, you skip over it, you refuse to say it. We don't, because we want to make sure that we prioritize everyone's feelings. We want to protect that and it be a safe place. I like to say that for me, when I think about my legacy, I recognize that I, like each of you, am writing the autobiography of my life every day. If we live to be 100, and most of us will not, for some of us, let's say you're 50 years old, you're already halfway through the autobiography. You get to decide what each chapter says. I would like my legacy to say Brooklyn Sawyers Belk was more of a Brown court than a Plessy court, despite the all deliberate speed part. The last chapter of that book is going to be your obituary. What do you want it to say about you? That you were part of the old guard and you went along with the way things were, or that you were part of change, the face of change? I think the latter. Our words matter. And as Dr. King told us, a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. In other words, some of these things don't impact you as an individual, perhaps, or at least you think they don't. But if it impacts your fellow classmate, your fellow man or woman, then it impacts you indirectly. Make your words matter and use them to effectuate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Brooklyn. We really appreciate those words and seeing your beautiful family here. We will take a break, a 15-minute break, It is important that if you are here for Lyceum, that you check out either through QR code or the sign-in sheets at either of the exits. And then please join us back at 11:15, I believe. 11:15, I don't have my schedule, for the breakout session. We promise it will be interactive. You'll get a chance to talk to Brooklyn. We'll have microphones in the audience, so please feel free to come back. This counts as one Lyceum. If you come back at 11:15, there's another Lyceum with a breakout session. Okay? Thank you. Can we give Brooklyn a round of applause again? Please come back at 11:15.